February 20th, 1944, near Leipzig, Germany, 9:40 hours. Colonel Wilhelm Hartmann raised his field glasses, the cold wind biting into his face as he stepped onto the observation platform of the Luftwaffe command bunker. The sky above was a pale winter blue, clear, cold, and cruelly bright. And then, as he looked west, he saw it. At first it appeared like a thin haze, a dark smudge on the horizon. But within moments it resolved into hundreds and thousands of silver specks crawling across the heavens. Engines thundered faintly at first, then built into a low, rolling tremor that made the steel grating under his boots vibrate. The hum grew until it became a continuous roar that seemed to swallow the air itself. "Mein Gott," one of his aides whispered beside him. "There are so many—" Hartmann didn't answer. Through the binoculars he saw them, the unmistakable silhouettes of Boeing B-17 Flying Fortresses and consolidated B-24 Liberators. They flew in endless box formations, the glint of sunlight flashing off polished aluminum. The bombers stretched from one edge of the horizon to the other, a living river of metal and propeller blades. Above them, tiny glimmers darted and danced, P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, their long-range escorts, gleaming like silver knives against the sun. Radar confirms over 1,200 contacts, an operator called up from below, his voice shaking. Another wave forming behind them. Hartmann lowered his binoculars. The sound was no longer a hum. It was a thunderclap that rolled across the fields and villages, shaking roof tiles loose. Farmers in the distance had stopped their work, staring up at the sky in frozen disbelief. Even the flak crews standing beside their 80mm guns seemed momentarily paralyzed. He turned to his adjutant. "Scramble every available fighter. Everything that can fly." The younger officer hesitated. "Sir, many of the airfields, they're already under attack." Hartmann's jaw tightened. He knew it. Reports had already filtered in from Western commands. Airfields from Münster to Hanover were being bombed even as this wave advanced. The Americans weren't just bombing factories anymore. They were bombing the Luftwaffe itself. High above, contrails stitched the sky into a vast white web. BF-109s and FW-190s clawed their way upward, tiny black specks rising into a blinding storm. But the Mustangs were waiting. Hartmann saw it unfold like a scene from a nightmare. Streaks of silver diving from above, gunfire flashing in quick bursts. Within seconds, the thin white trails of burning fuel began to arc downward. The commander felt his throat tighten as one of the German fighters spiraled earthward in flames, leaving a thick black trail of smoke that cut through the cold air. He had watched men die before, but never like this, never so helplessly, never so completely outmatched. "Sir," another aide said, "our intercept squadrons are requesting orders. Should they engage directly or—" Hartmann interrupted, his voice harsh. "They engage. All of them. No retreat. Not today." He stepped forward again, feeling the tremor of distant flak bursts underfoot. The horizon had vanished behind a curtain of smoke and condensation trails. The sunlight dimmed slightly as though filtered through the vast shadow of the bombers. And in that moment he understood what was happening. It was not just an air raid. It was annihilation, methodical, relentless, overwhelming. The Allies were blotting out the sun, and the Luftwaffe was being erased from the sky. He said nothing, but his thoughts echoed the words he would later write in his diary that night. "We no longer control the air. We only endure it." From the west, the deep rhythmic rumble of engines grew louder still. The next wave was coming. The sirens began to wail across the countryside, a shrill rising sound that carried through the frozen air like the cry of something wounded. From airfields around Leipzig, the Luftwaffe scrambled what few aircraft they could muster. Mechanics rushed between fighters, pulling chocks, spinning propellers, shouting over the deafening roar of engines on the tarmac. Oberleutnant Karl Weiss climbed into his Messerschmitt Bf-109G, heart pounding. The cold bit through his gloves as he gripped the throttle. He could already see the sky darkened by the approaching bombers. Behind them, flak bursts dotted the heavens in black puffs. Too small, too few, too late. Sturmstaffel ready for takeoff. His radio crackled. "For the fatherland." "For the fatherland," Weiss murmured back, though the words tasted hollow now. He pushed the throttle forward, the Messerschmitt shuddering down the runway before leaping into the sky. At altitude, chaos reigned. The air was filled with smoke, debris, and the howl of engines straining at full power. American fighters swooped through the formations like hawks through a flock of crows. Weiss barely caught sight of the P-51 that passed him before tracers zipped past his canopy. He rolled, dove, and pulled back hard, his stomach lurching as he narrowly avoided a burst of gunfire. Everywhere, German fighters were falling. The sky, once their hunting ground, was now a graveyard. From his command post, Colonel Hartmann listened as the radio net dissolved into a storm of frantic voices. Red 2 down. We've lost contact with Group 8. Fuel low and returning to base. Negative. Stay in the air. Do not. Then silence. Static. He stared at the operations map before him, a sea of tiny markers that represented what was left of his fighter groups. Each one flickered as reports came in, shot down, out of fuel, missing. Within 20 minutes, the sky over central Germany had become a slaughterhouse, and yet the bombers kept coming. From his bunker's observation window, Hartmann could see the heavy formations approaching the industrial outskirts of Leipzig. Factories, refineries, and rail yards, all prime targets for the Allies' new doctrine of total destruction. He turned to his intelligence officer. They're not just bombing our supply lines anymore. They're dismantling our future. Outside, the first bombs began to fall. The sound was not like thunder. It was sharper, more final. The earth itself seemed to twist beneath the shock waves. Entire blocks vanished into flame and dust. The air turned gray with pulverized stone. The command bunker trembled, dust drifting from the ceiling like falling ash. Sir, reports from Schweinfurt and Regensburg, an aide said. They've been hit again. Entire aircraft plants, gone. Hartmann's stomach turned. Those plants built the engines, the airframes, and the very heart of the Luftwaffe. Without them, they couldn't even replace what they'd lost today. He stepped outside after the raid, boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted steel. The acrid stench of burning oil filled his lungs. Above him, the contrails were already dissipating. The bombers long gone, just a fading thunder on the horizon, and then he saw it. A lone B-17 tumbling down, its left wing sheared off, burning furiously. The crew bailed out in dark silhouettes against the smoke-choked sky. Parachutes blossomed like pale flowers drifting down over the wreckage of the city. Even the victors paid in blood, he thought grimly. But they could afford to. The Reich could not. He knew this wasn't the end, merely the beginning of a new kind of war. One where numbers, fuel, and factories mattered more than courage or skill. The Luftwaffe's glory days, those fierce, golden months of 1940 when German pilots ruled the skies, were now distant echoes. The hunters had become the hunted. Hartmann turned away from the burning city. Prepare a report for Berlin, he ordered softly. Tell them the skies belong to the Americans now. March 5th, 1944, Augsburg, Germany, 6:15 hours. The steam hung low over the Messerschmitt assembly hall like a ghostly fog. Sparks rained from overhead cranes as workers rushed to finish another Bf-109 airframe, wings half riveted, canopy still missing. Oil slicks glistened on the floor. The smell of hot metal and welding flux clung to everything. Engineers worked in a frenzy, sleeves rolled up, goggles fogging with sweat. These factories had once produced aircraft faster than the Reich could train pilots to fly them. Now they were racing against time itself. You have 3 hours to get this one flight ready, the foreman shouted, voice ragged. The front line needs replacements. A young mechanic rubbed tired eyes, blotched red from lack of sleep. We won't have 3 hours, he muttered. He was right. Outside, Colonel Hartmann stood at the edge of the airfield, coat pulled tight against the morning cold. He had been sent here personally to inspect the damage from the previous raids and to oversee reorganization. But as he stared down the length of the runway, lined with half-assembled aircraft and fuel trucks, a sickening realization settled in his chest. They were rebuilding the Luftwaffe on borrowed time. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the faint rumble of distant engines, not thunder, not weather aircraft. Hartmann spun toward the sound. Somewhere beyond the clouds, something huge was moving, deliberate, steady, unstoppable. A radio operator burst from the admin office, face pale. Sir, radar reports a massive inbound formation. Hartmann snatched the clipboard. Even without his binoculars, he could see the dark shapes materializing on the horizon. Not dozens, not hundreds, thousands. He didn't wait for confirmation. Sound the alarm, klaxons shrieked through the factory complex. Workers dropped tools and sprinted for shelters. Pilots ran for their aircraft, jumping onto wing roots, scrambling into cockpits. Inside the factory, the lights flickered as the power grid overloaded. Bulb filaments buzzed and burst. One mechanic yelled over the chaos, "They're coming back, again?" Then the roof went dark. A shadow passed over the factory windows. The morning light vanished as if a total eclipse had swallowed the sun. Inside the cockpit of a B-17 at 22,000 feet, Captain Robert McCain steadied the bomber through turbulent air. Frost laced the edges of his windshield. Below he could see the long runway of Augsburg, the rows of unfinished Messerschmitts lined up like toys. The voice of the lead navigator crackled through the intercom. Target confirmed. Factories and airfields. Bomb run in 60 seconds. McCain adjusted his oxygen mask. Bomb bay doors open, metal groaned. The cold wind rushed upward through the fuselage. Below, the first 80mm of flak bursts mushroomed black against the sky. German gunners worked the batteries frantically, bare hands bleeding from cold and recoil. "Higher! Aim higher!" a battery sergeant shouted. But for every shell they fired, the Americans sent another wave. The P-51 escorts swooped down like hawks, strafing the airfield. A row of parked fighters exploded into flame, wings curling like burning leaves. Fuel trucks went up next, sending shockwaves through the hangars. Inside the factory bunker, the floor trembled like the world itself was cracking. Hartmann watched through a narrow slit in the concrete wall, jaw clenched. He could feel the difference now. The precision, the coordination. The Americans were not merely attacking. They were dismantling the ability to fight back. He whispered to himself, "They're destroying the Luftwaffe on the ground." High above, McCain's bombardier lined up the drop. The crosshairs settled perfectly over the factory complex. Release. Bomb racks clattered as tons of steel tumbled free. The B-17 lurched upward, suddenly lighter. Each bomb fell silently for seconds. Then one by one, whump, whump, whump. Shockwaves rolled across Augsburg like sledgehammers. The Messerschmitts under construction were thrown into the air like toys, wings torn from fuselages. Roofs collapsed inward as the assembly hall detonated into a rolling cloud of fire and shrapnel. Hartmann staggered under the force of the explosions. The ground shook. Pipes burst overhead, spraying steam. Dust filled the bunker until the air itself became gray. Beside him, a young officer grabbed the radio handset, coughing. "Berlin needs to know we've lost Augsburg. Production will be halted for months. A bomb hit so close the bunker lights went out. Equipment toppled, papers scattered. Hartmann didn't need reports, he knew what this meant. The war factories could not be saved." Through the bunker slit, he watched the final bomber formation disappear into the clouds, leaving behind a city burning and silent, except for the crackle of flames. The Luftwaffe had always believed that German engineering could outbuild any enemy, but no amount of craftsmanship could overcome the sky being owned by someone else. June 6, 1944, Normandy coast, France, 05:12 hours. The sea was a churning sheet of steel-gray waves whipped by freezing wind. The dawn horizon glowed with a sickly orange light, not from sunrise, but from burning ships and tracer fire. At 5,000 meters of altitude, Colonel Wilhelm Hartmann stood rigid inside the operations trailer near Caen, clutching a headset so tightly his knuckles went white. The forward Luftwaffe command had been moved closer to France weeks earlier. An emergency relocation as Allied airstrikes leveled one airbase after another in Germany. But nothing had prepared him for this. Radio static crackled like frying wires. A frantic voice broke through. "Massive Allied sortie over the channel. Hundreds, no, thousands is heading south." Hartmann pressed the microphone to his lips. "Identify." He never finished. Outside, the diesel generator rattled. The ground shook. Controllers rushed from table to table, knocking over mugs of black coffee and stacks of aerial reconnaissance photos. "Sir, reports from Radar Station Panther," a technician shouted. "Our screens are flooded. The entire scope is just white, not empty, overloaded." Hartmann slammed his palm onto the table. "Nonsense. A scope cannot." The tech rotated the radar display toward him. Hartmann's words died. The screen was white, not from malfunction, but from sheer volume of incoming planes. The machine had no capability to differentiate. It was overwhelmed into blindness. Another officer stumbled in from the entrance, gasping for air. Tactical headquarters from Paris just confirmed. Allied paratroopers are dropping inland. He pointed shakily toward the coast. D-Day has begun. Hartmann's breath stopped. The invasion, the one they had feared, theorized. And prepared for mud was here, above the coast. The world had become wings and thunder. In formation flight, 13,000 American and British aircraft crossed the channel, C-47s towing gliders, troop transports droning steadily, and fighter squadrons weaving above them in lethal, overlapping layers. A single Luftwaffe night fighter, a Ju-88, climbed towards the formation. Its pilot, Lieutenant Franz Becker, blinked through the night vision filter, stunned by the sight. The sky was full of them. C-47 Dakotas flew wingtip to wingtip, their bellies open as paratroopers poured into the darkness. Silhouettes dropped into the cold air, chutes opening like white flowers over the French countryside. The voice of Becker's radio operator trembled. There must be thousands, Becker swallowed. We attack. Even if it kills us. He swung the Ju-88 into position behind a transport. The gunners rotated their turrets. He squeezed the trigger. Tracer fire streaked toward the C-47, ripping through the port engine. Fire streamed from the wing, but before Becker could adjust for a second pass, a shadow swooped from above at impossible speed. A Spitfire. Its cannons flashed. The Ju-88's cockpit erupted in splinters and glass. Becker screamed, choking on blood as the aircraft rolled uncontrollably. The night was filled with spinning earth, exploding clouds. The roar of wind. The Ju-88 slammed into the sea. The Spitfire never even broke formation. Back at the command trailer, Hartmann's headset spat fragments of emergency codes. All squadrons grounded, fuel depots hit. No air cover. Allied fighters everywhere, requesting permission to withdraw. Hartmann leaned over the map table. He saw the pattern now. The Allies weren't just protecting the beaches. They were isolating the entire region. Every road, every bridge, every communication line. Get Group 5 airborne, he barked. If we can disrupt their paratroopers, we may. A young pilot burst through the trailer door. Oberstabsfeldwebel Emil Kruger, face streaked with grease and soot. Sir, they destroyed the airfield. Bombers hit it before sunrise. Runways are cratered, hangars burning. We can't take off. Hartmann stared at him. You're telling me the Luftwaffe is grounded during the largest invasion in history? Kruger nodded. His eyes glistened. Not from fear, but from the humiliation of absolute helplessness. They have total air superiority, sir. Hartmann turned slowly back to the radar map. The white screen blinked. Planes upon planes upon planes, his voice cracked. Then we have already lost the day. Daylight revealed the scale of Allied domination. P-47, Thunderbolts strafed German convoys trying to move toward the beaches. Trucks burst into flame. Motorcyclists abandoned their bikes and dove into ditches. There was nowhere to hide. Not under trees, not under camouflage nets. A Wehrmacht tank commander shouted from his hatch, "Where is the Luftwaffe? Where are our fighters?" No one answered. They all knew the truth. The Luftwaffe wasn't destroyed in one battle. It was strangled, starved, and suffocated until the sky itself became enemy territory. Hartmann stood outside the trailer as a final squadron of P-51 Mustangs roared overhead, their engines screaming like war horns. They passed so close the gust bent the grass flat. He didn't flinch, he just whispered, "We have lost the sky. And once a nation loses the sky, it loses the war." January 1st, 1945. Luftwaffe Air Base at Ettinghausen, Western Germany. False 10 hours. Snow swallowed the landscape in a dull, lifeless gray. The pre-dawn sky hung low with clouds, heavy, suffocating, silent. A biting wind cut across the airfield as mechanics worked by lantern light, breath misting into the air as they pulled frayed canvas covers off aircraft wings. The operation had been named Bodenplatte. The last throw of the dice. Over 200 Luftwaffe fighters, Bf-109s and FW-190s, stood wingtip to wingtip like predators waiting to be unleashed. Many were patched with mismatched metal plates from salvaged wrecks. Pilots climbed into cockpits with trembling hands, knowing full well the reality. They were not launching to win the war, only to postpone the inevitable. Colonel Wilhelm Hartmann trudged through the freezing slush of the runway, collar pulled high against the wind. His boots crunched over ice and broken glass left from the last raid. Floodlights were off. Every precaution had been taken to avoid detection. He stopped at the nose of a Bf-109 where Feldwebel Otto Hark, a young pilot with dark rings under his eyes, leaned against the fuselage. Otto snapped to attention upon recognizing Hartmann. "You've flown 6 sorties in the last week," Hartmann said. "You should be grounded." Otto forced a crooked grin. "Sir, grounding me won't matter. Today there will be nothing left to fly." Hartmann didn't argue. The boy's words were true. A signal flare arced into the sky, red and fading. Engines roared to life up and down the airfield. Propellers churned the snow into blizzard clouds. One by one, the fighters taxied into position. The mission was simple: strike Allied airfields in Belgium. Destroy as many fighters on the ground as possible. Regain initiative. Create fear again. Otto's voice crackled through the open radio channel, trying to mask his nerves. "This time we will strike first." Hartmann closed his eyes, whispering something to himself. Not a prayer, but a confession. "We are fighting ghosts. The sky already belongs to them." At 05:02, the first wave lifted off. The fighters climbed into the icy darkness, engines howling against the wind. Hartmann watched them vanish into low cloud cover and felt a hollow, gnawing ache. He had just sent men to fight a storm with candlelight. Dawn, Belgium, Beauvaisin airfield. Rows of P-47. Thunderbolts sat sleeping, wings glistening with frost. The ground crews drank coffee in the mess tent, unaware of what streaked toward them through the clouds. The sound came first, a rising growl. Then the Germans broke through the mist. Bf-109s screamed downward like falling knives, guns blazing. The first Thunderbolt erupted into flames. A warehouse detonated. Ammunition cooked off in a chain reaction that sent a tower of fire into the sky. For the first time in nearly a year, the Luftwaffe struck with surprise. Direct hits. "We're destroying them on the ground," Otto shouted through the radio. And for a fleeting moment, it felt like 1940 again. But the moment died quickly. The second wave of Fu-190s rolled in, just in time to meet a wall of P-51, Mustangs climbing like silver arrows from the horizon. The Americans had been airborne already. They weren't sleeping. "Mustangs incoming!" Multiple squadrons. Tracer fire laced the sky. Otto banked hard, rolled, and dove. A Mustang clung to his tail. He yanked the stick back so hard it bruised his ribs, but the P-51 stayed glued to him like a shadow. "I can't shake him. Gunfire hammered Otto's fuselage. His Bf-109 burst into flame. The canopy filled with smoke as he tumbled into a spiral. Hartmann listened from headquarters, frozen in place. The scream over the radio was not just fear, it was realization. There are too many. They're already above us. The last German offensive, planned in secrecy, executed with bravery, was smothered in less than an hour. The Mustangs hunted them mercilessly. German fighters fell like snowflakes, each one snuffed out before they could even climb away. Back at Eddinghausen Air Base, only a handful returned. Some landed on shredded tires. Others belly-landed, fuel gone, engines shot. Mechanics ran toward the wrecks, dragging extinguishers through the snow. A crying pilot crawled out of his cockpit, hands trembling uncontrollably. Hartmann stepped onto the runway as the surviving pilot staggered past him, silent, hollow, eyes dead. A report was placed into his hand. Casualty numbers, aircraft losses. Mission results. He scanned the page, his lips parted slightly. No. He read it again. 25% of Luftwaffe fighters lost in a single morning, and the Allies replaced their losses within hours. Hartmann lowered the paper. The war wasn't lost because Germany ran out of courage. The war was lost because Germany ran out of sky. April 16th, 1945. Outside, Berlin rain hammered the ruined tarmac of a forgotten auxiliary airstrip. The concrete was cratered, splintered like broken bone. Shards of propellers stuck out from muddy bomb pits. Burned fuselage frames, once proud Bf-109s and FW-190s, lay twisted like metal skeletons. Colonel Wilhelm Hartmann stood alone beneath an improvised lean-to of torn canvas, clenching a damp dispatch report in his gloved hand. The ink was smeared from rain and sweat, but the words remained unmistakable. All remaining Luftwaffe fuel reserves are exhausted. Aircraft incapable of takeoff. He ran a hand down his weathered face. His uniform, once immaculate, and was faded and ash-stained. He hadn't slept more than 2 hours in days. The distant thunder of artillery echoed across the plain. Berlin was dying. He looked skyward. Nothing. No contrails. No fighters. Only the low ceiling of rain clouds choking the heavens that once defined him. To be a Luftwaffe officer and look up at an empty sky, that was punishment. A lone figure approached across the airfield. Feldwebel Emil Kruger, one of the few pilots who had survived Bodenplatte, limped toward him. His flight jacket hung loose on starved shoulders, the fabric stained with engine oil that never washed out. "Sir," Kruger rasped. "Berlin Command wants confirmation. Can we assemble any aircraft at all?" Hartmann gestured toward the runway. Kruger followed his gaze. 2 aircraft remained, not fighters. Not bombers, trainers, Booker Bu 181. Bestmans, canvas-covered, underpowered, unarmed, used to teach cadets how to fly straight and land without killing themselves. They might as well have been children's toys. Kruger let out a hollow laugh, the kind that wasn't amusement, just surrender. "The Americans will swat us like flies." Hartmann's voice was soft. "They won't even notice us." A distant rumble. Not artillery this time. Engines. Kruger tensed. "Ours?" Hartmann shook his head. From the west, the clouds tore open. 4 dark shapes emerged, then 20, then more. A stream of B-17s and B-24s flew overhead, escorted by P-51 Mustangs. Even in the rain, their formation was crisp, disciplined, effortless. Millions of horsepower, millions of gallons of fuel, millions of dollars of industry. One nation's sky machine. A Mustang dipped low, passing just above the ruined airfield. Its glossy fuselage reflected the flash of distant flames. The pilot throttled back slightly and banked, almost curious, like a hawk glancing at a crippled bird. Kruger's fist clenched. "They mock us." "No." Hartmann shook his head slowly. "We are beneath their notice." The P-51 climbed away, rejoining its formation without a second glance. The insult landed harder than any bullet. Inside the cracked and leaking control hut, Hartmann spread a tattered map over the table. Thick red arrows marked Soviet advances from the east. Blue arrows, American forces, pushed from the west. Berlin was being crushed in a vice. The Luftwaffe situation board was nearly empty. Most squadrons were crossed out. The ones that weren't had no fuel, no parts, no pilots. Hartmann watched rain drip from the ceiling and strike the map, dissolving Europe into waterlogged smears. Kruger stood behind him, shivering. "Sir, you should get out. Escape. Save yourself." Hartmann exhaled slowly, as if letting go of the last warm breath he possessed. "I was in the control tower at the beginning," he said. "When the sky was ours. When German aircraft ruled every horizon." He traced a finger along the faded photograph pinned to the wall. Young pilots laughing beside pristine Messerschmitts, blue sky stretching behind them. But now I stay until the end. Thunder cracked overhead, except it wasn't thunder. Through the iron-gray clouds, a shadow descended, a massive one. Kruger ran to the shattered window and froze. B-29 Superfortress, not even part of the European theater. Yet here she was, a symbol of power beyond comprehension. 4 enormous engines, pressurized, long-range, capable of carrying a single bomb that could erase a city. She didn't attack. She didn't need to. Her presence communicated a simple truth. There is no sky left for you. Hartmann felt something inside him unravel. Not fear. Not anger. Acceptance. He stepped out from beneath the shelter into the rain. Cold water soaked through his uniform, numbing him. Kruger watched silently as his commander stood in the downpour, staring upward. Once he had commanded the most feared air force on Earth. Now he was a man looking at a sky he no longer belonged to. He whispered, not to Kruger, not to the rain, but to the memory of every pilot who never returned. "Herrgott." We fought until the sky ran out. A distant explosion rumbled from Berlin. The horizon flickered orange. Kruger limped to his side. "What do we do now?" Hartmann lowered his chin. The answer was simple, heavy, irrefutable. "We surrender the air." And as the rain washed the last streaks of engine oil and dirt from his hands, Colonel Wilhelm Hartmann removed his Luftwaffe Eagle insignia and,